Namaste and welcome to this second In Conversation With here from Hindu Climate Action. Before we start, I'd like to say thank you to all for investing their time on this Sunday morning and coming to join us for this In Conversation With. Before I start, I'd like to welcome and talk a little bit about Hindu Climate Action and what we do here. So we're a UK-based organisation composed of a small but diverse team of Hindus. We have come together with a goal of mobilising the Hindu community on this ongoing climate emergency. And the way in which we want to do this is engage the wider community to highlight the importance of protecting the environment. And these are mediums such as the In Conversation With and all the array of work that we are going to be doing in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the individual I'll be having the In Conversation With, Aneesh, who is a fellow member of the Hindu Climate Action team. And a little bit about Aneesh. Aneesh is a recent biology graduate from the University of Bristol and has a keen passion for spreading environmental awareness and tackling plastic pollution. This is what led him to become the president of Bristol Against Plastic when at university. And he's going to join us and share his own experiences of growing up in Kenya and how that has inspired him to fight plastic pollution. So with me talking less and Aneesh talking more, I'd like to get into this In Conversation with Aneesh Malde, who's our speaker for today. And he'll highlight the crucial issues around plastic pollution and also look at the positives and what we can do in line with plastic pollution. So over to you, Aneesh.
Thank you, Rajesh, for that lovely introduction. And good morning to all our viewers today. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning. Or if you're watching at another time, thank you for tuning in to this In Conversation With. So I'll head straight into it as it's a deep dive into plastic pollution. I do apologize in advance. Some of the start of it is going to be very factual, but towards the end, we're going to inspire you to want to take action and alleviate some of one of the biggest problems in the world, which is plastic pollution. So I'm certain that most of you already know why this conversation is happening. In the mainstream media, we've heard a lot about plastic pollution, and one of the most shocking statistics recently was that one garbage truck of plastic is dumped into the water every second, which is a ridiculous amount. So I'd like to set the scene today by just talking about some of the problems plastic brings, as well as a little bit of its history. And let's get straight into it. So the word plastic, funnily enough, actually originates from a Greek word called plastikos, which was thought to mean unhardened clay that had the properties of being molded or malleable or shaped. And it was initially developed using natural materials such as shellac gum. And now they've been substituted by petroleum over about half a century ago. Plastics are also defined as man-made materials that are composed of synthetic or organic polymers. And these, as I said earlier, can be molded into solid objects, which is why it makes plastic such an amazing property, because it can be molded into different shapes like chairs, Tupperware, spoons, cutlery. So lightweight, robust, and cheap, it's easy to produce, and plastic has been a miracle material across the world. However, the downside of this miracle material, as we know, it's surplus. There's so much of its excess circulation, and the demand is still rising. And one of the main issues is there's a significant lack of resources to tackle this excess production. And this is particular in developing nations. Mainly this is due to the lag in recycling and waste management facilities globally. And this results to millions and millions of plastic materials ending up in the ocean and landfills every year.
Thank you very much, Aneesh, for such a, should I say, diverse summary of what we're going to be discussing today. And I really, it resonated with me, the links between history and the importance of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's go into a bit of a dialogue and should I say a bit of a Q&A between us both to understand this a little bit more. So to start with, what actually happens with plastic, Aneesh?
It's a great starter to the question. So unfortunately, most of the consumer plastic that we generate nowadays never fully goes away, and they just break into little pieces called microplastics. I'll stretch on this and expand what microplastics are later in this conversation. But a 36-day nautical expedition that was carried out by Plastic at Sea, so the Sea Education Association, in 2012 found this to be true. The team was studying plastic pollution in the ocean and found that out of 66,000 pieces of plastic, 95% of it had broken down over time and could be dated back to 1,000 years. Not 1,000 years, sorry, 100 years. And in the UK, over 5 million tons of plastic are consumed each year, and yet only 1/4 of it's recycled. So there's still such an excess population. 3/4 of that isn't recycled ends up polluting our oceans and causes damage to our ecosystem. And in less developed countries, majority of that plastic waste eventually ends up in the ocean, meaning that marine animals are really high at risk. So we can clearly see it's a problem, and the facts and figures are shocking. Something I didn't know, but yeah.
Thank you again, Aneesh. And I think it just shows that it clearly is a problem and it is very prevalent, and the facts and figures cited are quite shocking. But one thing it does do is nicely lead into our next question, in which why is plastic so dangerous for marine life?
So I'll break this question down into 3 answers. And the first one is the risks of ingestion. And globally, about 8 to 12 metric tons of plastic escape into the ocean annually. Ingestion of plastic is one of the main issues for marine animals, because plastic, when it breaks down, ends up staying in the gut biome of many marine animals. And a study proved this by showing that in 7 species of turtles and whales and seabird species all have ingested marine plastic in their systems. The second key issue of plastic in the marine environment is entanglement. It's a huge threat to marine life, and it occurs when species is caught in disregarded fishing nets, which are mainly made out of plastic. And these are also known as ghost nets. The last one is intoxication. So plastics contain an innumerable amount of toxic chemicals. And over time, when left in the ocean, these degrade and release very harmful toxins that can accumulate within an ecosystem. And obviously, marine animals that live in these ecosystems are taking in all these chemicals into their systems. And over time, when people who are pescatarian eat these animals or fish as such, ingest that, and it's a process called bioaccumulation, and we are actually taking in these toxic chemicals that are being put back into the ocean to our diets.
Wow.
Just to summarize, these 3 issues are one of the key reasons why there's an urgency of actually reducing the plastic waste that ends up into the ocean.
Thank you, Aneesh, and sorry to jump in there. So the 3 areas are really interesting, and I liked how you break that down into like key areas of risk, should I say. So the idea of ingestion, entanglement, and intoxication, which really help us to formalize the issue at hand, to be fair. And I certainly feel like this is an issue where we can make a difference without having to change our ways too much as well. So certainly is something that I'm learning throughout this in conversation with as well. Just the next question really is, can plastic also be linked with the idea of climate change? Hence, our main work is towards the climate and the environment. So it's a question that I think our viewers would really want to know. Is there links between plastic and climate change?
Another great question, Rajesh. And surprisingly enough, certainly plastic pollution and climate change have a really strong prevalent link. The main link is, think about how much energy is required to produce plastic. It requires copious amounts. And in most cases, this energy mainly comes from fossil fuels. And another statistic for you, sorry for the many statistics, but in 2019, the production and incineration of plastic combined was projected to contribute to around 850 million metric tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And a groundbreaking study very recently also examined that these greenhouse gas emissions from polyethylene plastic, which is one of the most used plastics in the world, made out of plastic bags, uncovered that polyethylene produce significant amounts of methane, which is another really harmful greenhouse gas, upon degradation, which in time it causes global warming to increase further and further.
Wow, again, Anish, some real eye-opening statistics. And I know you apologize for giving us statistics there, but it's something that I think helps us understand such the actual height of what we are actually doing to the environment and how it does really affect climate change. One thing that resonates with me is the idea of how we in Sanatan Dharma see the mother as Mother Earth, and we pay obeisances to Mother Earth through our ritualistic practices as well as through our formalized practices. So it's something that I think falls hand in hand with our dharma as well. So let's deep dive into the next question, seeing as we're really talking about all this idea of climate change. And I know you touched upon this a little bit, but the idea of microplastics versus macroplastics. Could you just tell us a little bit of the difference between both, Anish?
Of course I can. So as I had mentioned earlier, microplastics is a term that's been more and more commonly used in many articles. Just to break it down, microplastics and macroplastics have one distinct difference. Microplastics are defined as all forms of plastic with 15 millimeter diameter or less, really tiny particles of microplastics that have been broken down over time. Think about pebbles on the beach and how all the wear and tear has kind of made them into like really small rocks. And macroplastics are any plastic that are 5 millimeters or above in diameter. And two of these plastics present different issues, but synthetic fibers from microplastics are one of the biggest issues that we're hearing more and more of. And some studies have actually found microplastics in human lung biopsies. So what this means is we're actually inhaling microplastics into our lungs. And these shocking statistics can leave us feeling unhopeful for the future. But microplastics as well, just to not touch base a little bit more on that, is, as we mentioned earlier, affects marine life and terrestrial life. And not to mention the nuisance of seeing like plastic bags floating around on the streets. They're really eyesore, and they can end up also blocking sewage systems and polluting streets. And I'm sure all of us want to see a clean city that's green and full of like trees and not any pollution. So, and yeah, but all these, like I said, all these statistics can leave us feeling a bit unhopeful for the future. But I do believe that every individual can have the power to make a difference. It's not easy for us to talk about an issue that brings so many taboos in today's society. Even talking about plastic as an issue it takes a lot out of you, but it can be seen as a colossal problem, and it can also be seen that it extends beyond us. But I do believe our small actions make a huge instrumental difference. I want to give the viewers a 5-second break just to digest all the information I've said, and turn the next part of this conversation into a bit of a positive note.
Thank you, Anish. And whilst we give the viewers a couple of seconds, I just want to say, please do post any questions you have within the Facebook comments on Facebook Live, and we'll have the team pick them up and post them into us, and hopefully we can ask your very insightful questions to Anish and put him on the spot as well at the same time. So I think that was very interesting, Anish, and it certainly is learning for me personally, and I'm sure for the viewers. And it shows that what we do and what we know is something that really informs us to make them decisions that are better for the future. And just the idea of when you said ingesting plastic that we do not even know, that is alarming, I think, in anybody's eyes, really. But like you said, a more positive note and a more positive angle now of the conversation in which we turn to. So for a little bit of inspiration and for you to inspire us to drive this change, what can we do? So some helpful tips, some helpful guides of what we can practically do would be great, Anish.
Of course. So as I said, our little actions make a huge difference. And these are some of the things I've tried to implement in my own household. One of the biggest ones that I've tried to do is use alternatives wherever I can. And there's so many alternatives to single-use plastic products out there, from reusable cloth bags to stainless steel and glass. It can be seen as just giving up a simple choice, a single choice, like using a refillable water bottle instead of buying like plastic bottles. And one thing I really like to do is ask my grandparents some of the things that they used to do, because during their time, plastic was not seen as this huge issue. And all the steel dabbas that we used to keep when we used to go for like a wedding, and they were all seen as like these gifts given to other people to keep food in, using clay pot to fill your water up. These are simple things that kind of got lost over time, but implementing them back can lead to such a change. And for more information on alternatives to plastic, there's Beth Terry's blog, and she talks about 100 steps to a plastic-free life. And there's one other thing that I tried to do when I was in university, which was see if I can go a month and fill all the plastic items that I could into this one box. It did have its challenges, because obviously Sainsbury's, Tesco's all do wrap their stuff into plastic, but there are so many alternatives, and I ended up ending the month with less than half a box full of plastic items. And I'll touch base on this more towards the end of our conversation as to how I did it. The second one is the 3 R's, which I like to implement into my life, which is reuse, reduce, and recycle. But one thing I must stress on with recycling is it alone cannot tackle the issue. As I said earlier, there's such a surplus amount of plastic. And it needs to be coupled with other things like reducing the number of plastic items bought where possible, and reusing items such as bread bags or even reusable food bags again and again, if you can wash them and reuse them for other food. And an even more creative approach that I used to take as well was Tetra Pak containers. If you cut them down, when it reaches the halfway point, add some soil in there and put a flower. It's basically a free plant pot, and that degrades as well over time if you put it into a bed. The third one that I've tried to implement as well is to just completely boycott my personal use of single-use plastic straws, cups, and coffee. Everywhere I go, I try and carry a keep cup with me and my own spork, which is really incredible invention. It's a spoon, a fork, and a knife all in one thing. And how this has helped is over time, I've kept track of how many like plastic items I've bought. When I go to a shop, I don't buy any takeaway items. Like I carry my own stuff. And there's a really useful app called the Refill app, where you can go and you can search on the application which restaurants actually refill your Tupperware for you. And in most cases, they actually even give you a discount because you brought your own Tupperware. And over time, this will reduce the consumer demand for disposable plastics that end up mostly into the ocean. And it also allows space for local waste management to tackle like the already existing surplus of single-use plastics. And one of the really good news in the UK is that in April 2020, they announced the legislation of completely banning single-use plastic straws and cutlery, which came into place, I think last month. And yeah, invest into a refillable cup. It's an initial investment, but over time, it's going to save you the money in the long run. And last but not least, this is a soft topic for many people, in my opinion, but stop using plastic water bottles. Just has to be done. One study that stands out is from the Pacific Institute, where they say that producing water bottle, including the plastic container and the filtered water inside it, requires 3 times the amount in the actual bottle. So in other words, 1 bottle of water represents 3 liters of water used. And this doesn't say anything about the energy required to transport it or the plastic packaging itself. So if you don't like the taste of tap water, just think about investing into a water filter. And this will definitely save money in the long run, not just for yourself, but for the environment as such. And the last one that I'm going to say, very small one, shopping in bulk. For many households, the majority of plastic waste is generated in the kitchen. So one of the best ways to reduce plastic packaging madness is to bring your own shopping bags. Tote bags are a great alternative, and stock up on bulk foods. So buy tins in bulk and Costco. I'm sure so many people I know go to shop at Costco. In retrospect, it is a bit of a cheat, but it has less of an impact because you're driving to make one journey, you're buying things in bulk, and they're packaged together. But be careful to buy items that are not individually wrapped in single-use plastic, because that defeats the purpose. And many shops are also coming up now, which are called zero waste shops, and they're commonplace, where you can go take your stuff, refill on like jugu, kaju, like peanuts, couscous, oil, and in the long run, these will really reduce your plastic waste. And more shops are trying to integrate this into the supermarket concept, like Waitrose, Marks and Spencers. And over time, we will see changes slowly, and we can start now. It doesn't have to be then. And that's it for me.
Thanks very much again, Aneesh, for such simple and easy to do practical tips. We're not making a drastic change, but we're making a slow change towards that bigger picture. And I think that's fantastic. And them little changes in your shopping habits, in your behavioral habits are absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much. And I think it shows that it's the aphorism and the idea of just be the change. You be the change individually. And I think these values and these ideas, these principles you've talked about, certainly link in with our dharma, our scriptures, and our focus of ourselves as Hindus, because the idea of ahimsa, non-violence, the idea of karuna, compassion, are so in line with your thinking and thoughts there. So thank you for that as well. And just quoting one of our Upanishads, which says Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, meaning the idea of that element, that essence, that tattva of Bhagwan residing within us all, I think really shows that A, we don't know what we're ingesting because we could be ingesting plastic, and B, the environment is a part, if not that element of Bhagwan itself. So some fantastic links between the idea of our dharmic values as well. And let's face it, Sanatana Dharma is based on science and scientific values that we hold as well. So it's been fantastic because I've just been sat here kind of trying to link it in with our amazing values we have. But as we draw to a close, and I want to try my best to keep it on time, is I have one final question for you, Aneesh, and that is probably the biggest question of our conversation is, do you think it's our responsibility as consumers to relieve plastic pollution? Or do you think it's a sole responsibility of just organizations themselves?
It's a great question that links very much to what you just said earlier about Santana and how we have Bhagwan inside us. It is our responsibility to preserve our home where we live, which has given us so many resources that have allowed us to live the way we live today. And I know it's very easy to blame organizations. Believe me, recently in the news, there was an article that said Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Nestle have been accused of zero progress, which means over the last 3 years, they've done nothing towards reducing their plastic. Okay, not nothing, but very little towards reducing their plastic waste for the third year in a row. And they are named the world's top plastic polluters for a reason. But I do believe it's our role as consumers to make sure the items we buy are sustainably sourced and to hold companies accountable. Without demand, they will have no choice but to switch to more sustainable packaging, and the collective will shift, so they will have to shift. I also pose the same question to our viewers and ask them what they think. Is it our responsibility to not blame the system and to play our part in changing it, or is it solely the organizations, as they are one of the biggest producers of plastic?
I think that was very, very nicely answered there, Anish, and kind of gave us that conclusion of be accountable. And the change really does start within, as cliche as it is to say, it does. And I think if we don't make the change, the consumer doesn't make the change. It's that cyclical idea of the actions that we make really impact the consumer. So thank you very much. And I think we all just need to follow and drive that change as well. So now I want to open up the questions, and we do have a couple of questions from a few people. So I want to shift over to them questions basically and see if we can answer them. I know we do have a couple of questions of our own internally from a couple of people, but shifting away from them and answering our audience's questions first. The first question, Aneesh, to put you in the spotlight, is does that mean that people are consuming plastic too via their food and diet? And I know you touched on this, but do you mean literally that they're consuming plastic?
As I take a second to rephrase this question, but very, very good question. And as I said earlier, talk about the process of bioaccumulation. And what bioaccumulation means is throughout the ecosystem, our food links to the previous organism, be it plant or be it animal. And if you follow a pescatarian diet, this is more predominant towards ingesting plastic. Fish who live in the ocean are actually ingesting this microplastic, and many fish, when cut open, have been seen to have plastic in their gut biomes. Another link towards us actually taking in microplastic was in a documentary by the BBC called War Against Plastic. And they had an experiment where they actually filtered the air and found microplastic particles. And this was more and more predominant in big cities. They also shed some positive light on it that things can be removed by getting an air filter in your room, and this will take in all the dust and all the microplastic particles. But another insight is there's not enough research to know how this affects our body yet, but it is quite shocking to know that we are actually breathing in microplastic particles.
Thank you very much for that, Anish. And I think as you touched on it before and you nicely summarized earlier in the question, is that it certainly was alarming to me, and I'm sure it's alarming to our viewers, and hence why we have to make these positive changes to remove that ideology of us consuming plastic. Our next question is the idea of circular economy, and that idea of how many times can plastic be recycled in a circular economy, and can it be recycled continually? And I know you touched upon the idea of recycling is not the be all and end all. There is other things that we are going to have to do to make that change, but it would be good to see your views on that question.
A great question. And from what I know, the polymer that's used to make plastic continually gets degraded over time. So even today, you don't typically see products with 100% post-consumer recycled content, PRC as such. So technically, you can't reuse the same plastic material perpetually again and again over time. But as you can tell with aluminium, which is a single element, this can be used again and again and again. And that's why aluminium cans are more and more dominant nowadays, because they have a 100% recyclable element towards it, whereas plastic, because it's made of hundreds and hundreds of molecular bonds, they're much more difficult. And some plastics altogether are completely non-recyclable in the UK by our local waste facilities, like PVC, for example. And they don't last forever as such, which is a good thing, but some plastics takes thousands and thousands of years to degrade. So recycling as a concept in a circular economy works with some elements of plastic, but in all, we need to stop our consumerism of it, because there's so much of its surplus production already, and it doesn't fit. Just when we're recycling less and taking more, there's going to definitely still be a surplus as such. Hope that summarizes that question well.
Yeah, certainly. That was again very informative, and I think something for us all to take away. Again, I do want to summarize for the last question, because I know we're hitting our time banding. So the final question that comes in is, why is plastic so cheap? And is it because oil companies are subsidized? So I think again, the idea of plastic being cheap and it being subsidized. So it's the idea of the consumer environment again.
Plastic is cheap nowadays because it's priced in accordance to the price of crude oil. But for many companies that produce plastic in bulk, they buy it in bulk and they get a really cheap commodity on it, and the price does fluctuate. But right now, recycled plastic is still too expensive. and virgin plastic is what's dominating the market. When I say virgin plastic, plastic that's never been used before, and they come in these tiny pellets. And so we're still producing more and more of it because that's the cheap alternative rather than recycled. And subsidizing oil doesn't help in any of the efforts. It's more reducing the consumption of it, which will definitely decrease the demand of it. And then obviously over time, more and more won't be produced, but it will become a more expensive commodity in the future because of its resource use.
Thank you again, Aneesh, for answering all them questions. And I know I certainly put you on the spot, and you had no prep to answer them questions as well. So thank you again to all our viewers as well for posting some amazing and insightful questions. And I'm sure Aneesh found them insightful as well, and certainly allowed us to open our bandwidth a little bit in our understanding as well. Now, I know I asked the question, where has time gone? And I'm sure Aneesh does too. It's flown, and we have to wrap up the session here. But before we do, I want to say thank you to all who's joined. And to those who might have missed it today, you can always watch us back on our social media channels. I'm hoping it's also going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so please head over there. And also just like, share, and subscribe to all our social media channels. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. And one thing that I am pleased to say, through the hard work of the Hindu Climate Action team, we launched our website on Thursday. And I don't just say this as I'm part of the team, I say this as a person who views the website from the outside, that it truly is helpful, insightful, and allows you to make positive changes towards the climate. So please do check it out and share with friends as well. And I think from both me and Aneesh, what we really, and what I'm taking away, Aneesh, is let's all be part of this climate shift together. Let's all come together and understand what we can do better and how we can do that better. Before I wrap up and before I send my last wishes to you all, any last words from you, Aneesh?
So I want to say thank you to all our viewers for joining us today on this talk. Wishing you a lovely, lovely Christmas and hoping you can all make the most of it under these strange times. Namaste and thank you once more. Hope you find it an informative session, and do check out resources. And if you feel there is something more you can do, you can join campaigns, and starts within making small changes. It brings out a sense of joy that you are doing your bit to tackle such a big issue.
Thanks for them warm wishes, Aneesh. I'm sure it's appreciated by all. I just want to make you aware of this being our last, should I say, in conversation with of the year, but we've certainly got some exciting things lined up for the new year. We will be back on this platform with new speakers, new scholars. Aneesh, I'm sure we'll be back on here. I'm sure I will be back on here at some point. And it's a way we can showcase our community members. If you are interested in any projects, please email us at namaste@hinduklimaaction.org and just send us a message on our social media pages. We've got an amazing team behind us, and I want to thank all them for the work they do on the tech side, the work they do on everything that helps drive this action forward, because it is genuinely a team effort. So a massive thanks to all. And as Aneesh mentioned, a very merry and sustainable Christmas, should I say, and a happy new year in advance from all here at Hindu Climate Action. Stay safe, stay well, and do all take care. Namaste from me and Aneesh.